Welcome back to the Sans Hub Channel podcast, where we discuss the coolest scientific papers and preprints of our day.
Always something new and exciting.
If you're enjoying these deep dives into fascinating research, please take a quick moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel.
Yeah, it really helps us grow.
Helps us reach more curious minds.
That's right. More curious minds out there.
So today we're plunging into a really intriguing area.
I'm excited about this one.
Yeah, the potential connection between the herpes zoster vaccine.
Okay.
You know, that's the one for shingles.
Right.
And the subsequent risk of developing dementia.
Now, this is a topic that sits at the intersection of a couple of really active fields of research.
Yeah.
We're seeing increasing interest in the possibility that certain herpes viruses might play a role in neurodegenerative conditions like dementia.
Okay.
Simultaneously, we know that vaccines, particularly live vaccines, can have effects on the immune system that extend beyond just the targeted virus.
Exactly. So the big question is whether there's a direct link.
Yeah, a causal relationship even.
Between getting the zoster vaccine and a change in dementia risk.
Right.
Now, as you can imagine, figuring that out definitively is usually a real challenge.
It's tough. It's inherently complex, I guess you could say. Because when you look at who gets vaccinated and who doesn't, in the real world, those groups often differ in other ways too.
Oh, for sure.
It's tough to isolate the effect of the vaccine itself from other factors that might influence dementia risk, like overall health or access to health care.
Like all those kinds of things.
Exactly.
But this particular study we're looking at today took a really smart and innovative approach.
Oh, yeah, they did.
To try and get around those limitations.
Very clever.
They focused on data from Wales, where the rollout of the zoster vaccine in 2013 had a very specific eligibility cutoff based on birth date.
Oh, wow.
September 2nd, 1933.
I see. So think about that.
Okay, so this creates what researchers call a natural experiment.
That's right. So think of it like this. If you were born on or after that date, you became eligible for the vaccine.
Right.
Born just a day before and you weren't.
Crazy.
Wild.
So you have two groups of people born literally days apart who are likely to be very similar in most aspects of their lives and health. The main difference is that one group had a much higher probability of receiving the shingles vaccine.
Okay, so that's what they're looking at.
Yeah.
They examined the vaccination rates around this birth date. And they saw a sharp jump.
Oh, really?
Vaccination rates went from almost zero in those born just before the cutoff.
Wow.
To nearly 50%.
That's huge.
In those born just after.
Wow, that's a massive difference based on essentially a single day.
It is.
And because these two groups are otherwise so alike, it allows researchers to make a much stronger case that any differences they see in dementia rates down the line might actually be attributable to the vaccine itself.
It's like a real world.
It's like a natural...
If somewhat accidental controlled study.
Yeah.
Really cool.
So by comparing these two very similar groups with such a clear divergence in vaccination status, they could employ a statistical method called regression discontinuity design. Now, this technique allows for a much more robust analysis of potential causality than typical observational studies.
Yeah, because usually it's so hard to control for all the variables, but here they kind of have a natural control group.
Yeah, it's like the universe handed it to them.
Yeah. Nature did the experiment for them.
Yeah, it's a natural experiment.
Exactly.
All right, so after setting up this really clever study, what did they actually find when they followed these groups over a 7-year period?
The key finding
that they reveal
was that receiving the live attenuated herpes zoster vaccine, the specific vaccine used at the time called Zostavax, was associated with a lower likelihood of receiving a new diagnosis of dementia.
So that's good news.
That's promising.
So it wasn't like a negligible difference, was it?
No, not at all.
The numbers they reported suggest a pretty meaningful effect.
Yeah, it wasn't just like, oh, a tiny little change. This was something substantial.
Okay, so give us the numbers.
They observed about a 3.5 percentage point absolute reduction in the probability of a new dementia diagnosis over those 7 years. In relative terms, that translates to roughly a 20% reduction.
Wow.
And this finding was statistically significant.
So a 20% relative reduction, when you consider the significant impact and prevalence of dementia, that's a really compelling number.
It is indeed. And what added another layer of intrigue was that this apparent protective effect seemed to be more pronounced in women compared to men.
Oh, that's interesting. Did the researchers offer any thoughts on why this might be the case?
Their exploratory analyses hinted at a few possibilities.
Okay.
One idea is that vaccines, particularly live attenuated ones, have been observed in other contexts to elicit different and sometimes stronger immune responses in women compared to men. They also raised the possibility of sex-based differences in the general immune response to vaccinations.
Okay.
And even in the underlying biological mechanisms of dementia itself.
So it's possible that the vaccine is triggering some kind of broader immune modulation that happens to be particularly beneficial for women in terms of dementia risk.
That's one potential interpretation, and it really underscores the intricate ways in which vaccines can interact with our physiology.
Oh, yeah.
And potentially influence various health outcomes beyond the specific infection they target.
Yeah. It's amazing how much we're still learning about the immune system.
It really is. We're just scratching the surface, I think.
And to strengthen their findings, they didn't just rely on the data from whales, right?
That's right. I want to make sure this wasn't just a fluke or something specific to that population.
Right.
So to see if these intriguing results held up, they conducted a separate analysis using death certificate data from England and Wales combined. And in this part of the study, they focused specifically on deaths, where dementia was listed as the primary cause.
Oh, okay, so a slightly different angle.
Exactly.
And did they observe a similar trend in that data set?
Encouragingly, yes.
Oh, that's great.
Using the same natural experiment approach.
Right.
Based on the birth date eligibility for the vaccine across England and Wales.
Okay.
They found that eligibility for the Zoster vaccine was associated with a reduction in deaths attributed primarily to dementia.
That's really encouraging. So we have these two distinct data sets.
Yeah.
Looking at dementia through slightly different lenses.
Right.
New diagnoses in Wales and cause of death in England and Wales. Both pointed towards a potential protective effect of the shingles vaccine.
Yes. And that adds a significant degree of confidence to their findings.
Right.
You know, seeing consistent results across different populations and different types of data makes the observed association much more compelling and less likely to be due to chance or some other confounding factor.
Oh, yeah. Much less likely to be just a fluke. Okay, so now the million-dollar question.
Here it is.
How might a vaccine against shingles potentially lower the risk of dementia?
The big mystery.
Did the researchers delve into any possible biological mechanisms?
They did. They explored several potential pathways.
Oh, okay. Tell us more.
One possibility they considered was whether the effect was simply due to preventing shingles itself.
Like you're not getting sick, so...
Right, because shingles can sometimes lead to medical interventions or changes in health status that could theoretically influence dementia diagnosis or related care.
Okay.
However, their analysis suggested that the observed reduction in shingles cases due to the vaccine was likely not large enough to fully explain the reduction in dementia diagnoses.
Okay, so it's probably not just a downstream effect of avoiding the acute illness of shingles.
Right. It seems like there's something more going on.
What other possibilities did they consider?
Well, a key area they focused on was the idea of reduced reactivation of the varicella zoster virus, or VZV, which is the virus responsible for both chickenpox and shingles.
Right, so it kind of hangs out in your system.
Exactly. It can reactivate later in life and cause shingles.
And so the vaccine?
Well, they reasoned the vaccine likely not only reduces the incidence of clinical shingles outbreaks, but might also suppress subclinical or asymptomatic reactivations of the virus.
Oh, wow. So even if you don't get shingles.
Right. It might be keeping the virus at bay.
That's really interesting. And how might these reduced VZV reactivations be linked to a lower risk of dementia?
Well, there's a growing body of research suggesting that neurotropic herpes viruses like VZV could be implicated in the development of dementia through various mechanisms.
Oh, really?
For instance, they could contribute to inflammation within the nervous system or affect the health of blood vessels in the brain.
Okay.
So if the vaccine is helping to keep VZV in a more dormant state, that could potentially have a protective effect against these processes.
Makes sense. You know, if you can dampen down the activity of a virus known to hang out in the nervous system, you might reduce its potential to contribute to neurological issues later on.
Precisely. And interestingly, they also looked at whether treating shingles episodes with antiviral medication had any association with dementia risk, and found some suggestive evidence pointing towards a potential protective link.
Oh, so that kind of reinforces the idea?
Yeah, and similarly, They observed a higher incidence of dementia in individuals who had experienced multiple episodes of shingles compared to those who had only had it once.
Oh, interesting.
Both of these observations lend further support to the idea that VZV reactivation could be a relevant factor.
Okay, so a potential link through directly impacting the virus.
Right.
But they also touch on something called a VZV-independent immunomodulatory effect.
Yes. Now, this is where it gets really interesting.
Okay, this sounds a little more complex.
A little bit.
Break it down for us.
The researchers considered that the live attenuated vaccine might be having a broader influence on the immune system.
Okay.
That isn't specifically targeted at VZV. This could involve phenomena like heterologous immunity, where a vaccine against one pathogen can unexpectedly enhance immunity against others.
Oh, wow.
Or trained innate immunity, which refers to longer-lasting changes in the responsiveness of the innate immune system to various threats.
So the idea is that getting this vaccine might boost your immune system in ways that we don't fully understand yet.
Exactly, and those broader effects could potentially offer some protection against dementia.
Fascinating. And what led them to suspect this kind of wider immune effect?
Well, several clues.
Okay.
The stronger protective effect observed in women was one.
Right.
As these broader immune effects from live vaccines have sometimes been shown to differ between sexes. They also noted that the protective effect against dementia seemed to be more pronounced in individuals who had not recently received the influenza vaccine.
Oh, interesting.
Suggesting that the timing and receipt of other vaccines might play a role in these nonspecific effects.
So it's not just about the direct immune response to the shingles virus, but potentially about how the Zoster vaccine interacts with the overall immune landscape of an individual.
That's the working hypothesis.
That's pretty cool.
It is. It's like a whole ecosystem in there.
Yeah.
They even examined individuals with autoimmune or allergic conditions.
Okay.
Reasoning that if the effect were solely due to reducing VZV reactivation,
right,
those with these conditions who tend to have a higher risk of shingles might show a particularly strong benefit.
Okay.
However, they found some suggestive evidence that the vaccine might be more effective for dementia in those without these conditions.
Oh, interesting.
Which would point towards this broader immunomodulatory mechanism being at play.
So it's not as simple as just shutting down the virus.
Right. It seems like there might be these more complex interactions happening.
It sounds like this study has opened up a really fascinating avenue of research with potentially multiple ways in which the shingles vaccine could be influencing dementia risk.
It really has. It's got people thinking and talking and hopefully doing more research to figure this out.
You know, as with any scientific research, it's crucial to consider the limitations.
Of course, every study has limitations.
What are some of the caveats or unanswered questions that arise from this study?
Well, several important points to bear in mind.
Okay.
Firstly, as we mentioned earlier, this study focused on the live attenuated Zoster vaccine.
Right.
The newer Shingrix vaccine, which is a recombinant subunit vaccine, was introduced in the UK after the main follow-up period of this study.
Okay.
So these findings don't necessarily apply to Shingrix.
That's a key distinction for our listeners to understand, as Shingrix is now often the preferred vaccine due to its higher efficacy in preventing shingles.
Exactly. So we can't assume that these same effects will be seen with Shingrix.
Right. We need more research on that.
Absolutely.
Not their limitation.
Well, like any study that relies on health records, there's always a possibility of some degree of underdetection of dementia. However, the researchers argue that this underdetection is unlikely to differ significantly between the vaccinated and unvaccinated groups in their study design.
Okay.
So it probably wouldn't fundamentally change their main findings,
right,
although it might slightly underestimate the true magnitude of the effect.
Right. So if cases of dementia are being missed at a similar rate in both groups, the relative difference they observed is still likely to be a reliable measure.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It gives us a good indication of the potential impact.
What else?
Well, they also point out that their analysis is most directly relevant to the age range of individuals who are around 79 to 80 years old.
Okay.
At the beginning of the vaccination program in Wales, as this was the group most heavily represented in their analysis.
Right.
We can't automatically assume these findings would directly translate to much younger or older age groups.
Right. Different age groups might respond differently to the vaccine.
That's a possibility.
And of course, it's essential to remember that this is one study.
Right.
Albeit a very well-designed one.
Very clever design.
What are the next steps that the researchers or others in the field might take?
Well, the researchers themselves highlight the critical need for these findings to be replicated in other populations.
Yeah.
In different healthcare settings and using various data sources.
Okay.
The fact that they found similar patterns in the English and Welsh death certificate data is a promising step.
Right.
But further research is definitely needed to solidify these initial observations.
Yeah, we need to see if this holds up in other contexts.
Yeah, exactly. And crucially, more in-depth research is also required to fully elucidate the biological mechanisms at play.
Right.
How exactly might the Zoster vaccine be influencing the risk of dementia?
That's the big question. We need to understand the how.
Yeah, the why is interesting, but the how is really important.
I think this research provides a more compelling piece of the puzzle than previous studies.
I agree.
Moving us beyond simple correlations.
Right.
And suggesting a potential causal link.
It's a big step forward.
It really underscores the fascinating and sometimes unexpected ways in which vaccines can impact our overall health beyond just preventing the specific illness they target.
That's like a ripple effect.
Yeah, you get the vaccine for one thing,
Yeah.
and then suddenly you might be protected against something else entirely.
It really highlights the interconnectedness of our systems.
Absolutely.
And the complex interplay between our immune system and various aspects of our health.
Well, this has been a truly deep dive into a really thought-provoking piece of research.
It really has.
It's definitely something that will likely spark further investigation and discussion within the scientific community.
Oh, I'm sure it already has. People are buzzing about this.
And for you, our listener, this research offers an intriguing perspective on the potential benefits of the herpes zoster vaccine.
It really does.
Suggesting that it might play a role not only in preventing the discomfort of shingles,
Right.
but also possibly in reducing the risk of developing dementia later in life.
It's an exciting possibility.
However, it's important to keep in mind that this is still an active area of research.
Yeah, we don't have all the answers yet.
And more work is needed to confirm these findings and fully understand the underlying mechanisms.
This is just the beginning of the story.
But it's a very promising start.
It is.
This study certainly gives us food for thought.
It does.
And highlights the interconnectedness of our immune system and brain health as we age.
It really emphasizes the importance of taking care of our immune system throughout our lives.
Absolutely. And on that note, please don't forget to like the video and subscribe if you want more content like this.
We'll be back with more fascinating research soon.
See you next time.